I'm very happy to say that this distinguished lecture series is sponsored by External Publicity and Public Diplomacy Division of External Affairs Ministry is an initiative for wider public information and assessment and by the practitioner of the diplomacy. And this lecture series is for public awareness and how the Indian diplomacy is functioning and how it made it to, in the 21st century, to this developing country. My dear students, we are very fortunate that today we have Mr. Rajiv Sikri, who has already joined the services in 1970s and practiced the diplomacy and foreign service for more than 30 years. He has also written a very good book on Indian foreign policy, challenges and strategy that was published by SAIL's publication 3 years ago. So I welcome in Central University of Jharkhand and may I request you to Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir and Mr. Sikri and Dean Academics Anurag Datta Sir to please come on the podium. Please, please. Now I request Professor Anurag Datta, the academics, to say some words.
Professor Mishra, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Jharkhand, Ambassador Rajiv Sikri, our distinguished speaker of the day, colleagues and dear students. It's indeed a matter of great honor and privilege that we have amongst us such a distinguished personality such as Ambassador Rajiv Sikri. Ambassador Sikri has had a very, very distinguished career in the foreign service and apart from being, I think, our ambassador in Kazakhstan, has held very, very senior positions in several embassies and consulates in different countries, and has also been a very, very important part of our Ministry of External Affairs. And as you just heard, he has written a very, very authoritative book on India's foreign policy. I think for many of you, he must be a very familiar figure on TV, several news channels. Any of you must have, whenever there's any discussion on foreign policy, he is invariably there as an expert. Well, I think it would be obvious to all of us that in a very, very globalized society and globalized world like ours, there's a huge interdependence of countries. No country can survive or prosper on its own. And therefore, foreign policy is a very integral and a very important part of the governance of any country. And I think I'm particularly happy that Ambassador Sikri has agreed to come to our university, because it is important that particularly all you young students get to learn and get to interact with experts in the field and actual practitioners in the field. So I hope all of you students will reap the benefit of his presence here. We are all looking forward to this talk, and I'm sure it will be a fascinating exposition of India's foreign policy, what it has been, and what rethinking that needs to be done in this changing global scenario. Once again, thank you very much for coming. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor A.K. Mishra, sir, for saying some words, sir. Sir, please.
Honorable Sri Rajiv Sikri, distinguished professors, deans, faculties, and my dear students of Central Institute of Jharkhand, as well as the administrators sitting here. We are honored to have Mr. Sikri here amongst us in this university. We thought Mr. Sikri is visiting this city for the first time, but it is to our utter surprise. He was the person who got his first training, just like many of our students of CUJ getting their educational training here. But Mr. Sikri got his first training as a foreign service officer at Ranchi. And it was way back in 1971 what I gathered from him. And he has traveled throughout the present Jharkhand and erstwhile Bihar extensively, and he has a very good knowledge about the culture, education, economy of this state. But his visit to this state is for the first time after it is constituted, probably to Ranchi, and then we had a discussion with him about this city, and he was very much positive that the state has a potential and this university will grow into a global university. As an expert of foreign policy, we would like to listen from him because he has worked during our neighborness to Warsaw Pact countries, particularly Russia and the Eastern Bloc. Now this Eastern Bloc is dissolved. Most of the Eastern Bloc countries are now aligning to the West, becoming integral part of the European community. Economically they are changing. Scenario in Europe is changing drastically, although there is small disturbances here and there, like Ukraine. But the alignment is drastically changing. So in this global scenario of political change, reformation, realignment, we would like to listen from him how Indian foreign policy should be today in the context of the competing and newly emerging economic giants like India, China, and Brazil. We call BRIC countries. And in this scenario, we would also like to hear from him how best our foreign policy should be to make India a global giant in economy as well as in trade, international trade, because the fundamental of progress of a country depends on its base on economics. If we are economically strong, the rest of the things will come automatically. And academically, this country has contributed immensely to the global academic world and intellectual world. We would like to listen from him how things should change in the recent years so that we can benefit and come out as one of the leading partners in world economy. I now welcome Rajiv Sikri to deliver his talk.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Mishra, Professor Datta, distinguished members of the faculty here, dear friends. Why am I so high? Can you see me? Okay. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be back in Ranchi after exactly 43 years. As the Vice Chancellor told you, I cut my teeth learning about India, rural India, in Ranchi district, in this part of India with which I have a special bond. And therefore, when I got the invitation to come back to Ranchi, I did not hesitate for a moment. Many pleasant memories are associated here, and life has come full circle. I was a young officer, 23 years old, when I came here, full of hopes, dreams about India. Now I have retired, and we still have hopes and dreams. And that is why, when I retired, after that, I decided to write a book. Not a personalized book, but to share my understanding that in the 36, 37 years that I spent in the Foreign Service, what had I learned? And was there something about India's foreign policy which I could share with the people of India? Because if you recall, go back 5 years, when many of you would have been finishing school, there was a buzz about India, the great growing role of India. India was the toast of the whole world. There was a certain feeling that, India must play a much larger role in the world. And I think today, this has become far more acute. The public needs to be more knowledgeable about foreign affairs. It is not something which is happening in the mysterious buildings called South Block and North Block and the Prime Minister's office. It is something in which every citizen should be involved. And I think, therefore, it is important that there should be a growing awareness of the foreign policy challenges that we face, that there should be an understanding of what are the stakes and what are the options that we have. In short, I think it is essential that there is a debate, a stimulated debate among the people, especially young people, because the future is yours, as to where are we headed and why are we headed in the particular way. Because unless there is public support, foreign policy will not be successful. And I think that some recent incidents, whether it was in relation to Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, where Jayalalitha or Mamata Banerjee torpedoed many decisions, I think that without that public support, we will not succeed. I'm glad that the BJP manifesto talks about this, about Team India. And I think my conversation with you today is a small effort to create an awareness, to maybe stimulate your imagination, to set you thinking. This is particularly important because I believe that we are now in a time of flux and have been so for about 25 years. Those of you who are students of history would know the role that the French Revolution of 1789 played. It was a fantastic event in world history. the modern era can be said to begin from there. And the French Revolution was followed by a quarter century of disorder, chaos in the world. Well, European world mostly, but there was a lot of that. Napoleon rose, he was defeated, exiled. And then there was the Congress of Vienna of 1815, which set the concert of Europe and the 19th century pattern. Now you fast forward 200 years, come to 1989. That was the year the Berlin Wall fell. It was a very epochal moment in world history, because if there was one defining idea of the 20th century, it was communism. The whole social welfare movement, the rights of people, that was communism. So the fall of the Berlin Wall symbolized the end of that. But what happened after that is again a period of uncertainty, maybe even chaos. You have a time when you felt that, oh, you know, there is a unipolar world, but then suddenly you realize, no, it's not so. Then there is the rise of China, and then you said, no, not quite the rise of China. Then you said, oh, no, but the old style of wars are over, and then Crimea happened, and you said, oh, not really. So where are we headed? So it's a time of flux, it's a time of readjustment, and it is in this confusion, this kaleidoscope which is constantly changing. As kids, we look at that and the pattern keeps changing. We twirl it a little, it changes a little more. Where will it settle down? So, I don't know. But while it is settling down, this is the opening that is there for us. Now the problem is, and we all in our lifetimes have seen it, and you of course have grown up in this, that the 21st century world is a very different world from the 20th century world or the 19th century world. It's a globalized, interdependent, technology-driven world. And yet, the institutions that we are living with and the mindset that we have is a 20th century world. Nationalism was the idea of the 19th century. Nation states. Today we say, well, nation states, not really, it is multi-ethnic states. We thought it a while that a state has to be viable, but then you have little statelets which are smaller than Ranchi district, which are existing as independent states. There are 191 or something like that, members of the UN there. And there is a new focus on regional cooperation. There are new challenges of water, of food, of energy, of climate change. And while the United States remains the #1 power, it is declining in relative terms. There is the rise of Asia, China, talked about. Stirrings in Japan, you see a much more assertive Japan. There's Indonesia, Vietnam, all this, of course, India. Europe, of course, is so self-absorbed, trying to make sense of its integration. And all its efforts are focused on that. So the geopolitical tussles of the 21st century will be in Asia. And why do I say that? There is geography. There's demographics. The other day, somebody sent me that if you take a little circle, 50% of the world's population is in a circle which is, say, 2,000 miles centered in, say, Thailand. Because if you go north, you have all of East Asia, you have South. So between East and Southeast Asia and South Asia is more than 50% of the world's population. There's the economic dynamism. These are the growing economies. But then there are the problems. There is militant Islam, there is terrorism, there's drugs, there's piracy, there's widespread poverty, and there are failed and failing states. So Asia is where the hope is, and Asia is where the fears are. Asia is where the challenges and the opportunities lie. Now in this broad scenario, macro picture that I have painted before you, I ask, well, where does India go? Where does India stand in all this? And I think that in crafting our foreign policy, we should take a broader view, not of just of a self-absorbed India, but India in the larger picture of the world. Now the first point I want to suggest to you is that India is at the center of Asia. I say this not because I'm an Indian, but that is a reality, that's a fact, and it has always been so. After all, it is not for nothing that it is called the Indian Ocean, because it is an ocean which is dominated by India. If you look at other civilizations and cultures, it was the search for India. Columbus came here looking for India. He thought he had reached India when he landed in the West Indies. It's still called the West Indies, and it was called the East Indies. There was the search for India. You had the British Empire, which depended on India, because without India, they would not have been able to extend their influence throughout Asia. So there was a foreign policy of the UK and there was a foreign policy of British India, which is why it was so important. One of in fact, the first Secretary General of the Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Sir Shankar Vajpayee, described it very well. He says, you know, India has 3 levels of security. The first is from the Hindu Kush to the Iraqi. Now, Afghanistan to Iraq. What happens in this space is of direct interest to India, which is why we take an interest in what happens in Afghanistan. We take an interest in Burma, and Burma was a part of India till 1937. The second is from Aden and Hormuz to Singapore. That is the extended space, what we call the Northern Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea. And the third is from Suez to Shanghai, or now you can say from Suez, that is from the Middle East to the Far East. That is where our crucial interests lie, and therefore we cannot be indifferent to what happens in this space, depending on which level of security or circle that we are looking at. I have also tried to suggest that India is at the crossroads or the intersection of 5 arcs. Which are these 5 arcs? One is the arc of growth and prosperity, extending from India through Southeast Asia to East Asia, what I'm talking about. That's where the growth and the dynamism is. The second is to our west, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Gulf, Arab world, the arc of instability and turbulence. The third is the arc of energy. 90% of the world's energy, at least the exportable energy, is in this arc, from the Persian Gulf to the Caspian, through to Russia and Siberia. It's all next to us, whether it is oil or gas. The fourth is the arc of communications. The sea lines of communications, the Indian Ocean, all the shipping lanes, the energy, the trade, so much of the world's trade is passing just within a few hundred miles of Indian shores. And then the fifth, when I look north, I see an uncertainty, Tibet, Xinjiang, Central Asian republics. Where are they going? So we are at the center of all this. And we have to see how to look at our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities and challenges. There are expectations of India. Globally, India is seen as a benign rising power. Maybe it's not so seen as a rising power today, but still it's seen as a benign. We don't threaten anyone. We are goody-goody boys. That may be so today, but it is not necessarily true forever. If India, I can assure you, grows consistently at 7, 8, 9%, in 10 years or less, you will become a country of concern to the big players, the Americans and others. Because your essential advantages, strengths, which I've just outlined, are so enormous that if you were to be an economy of the size of China, say, you would be able to exert far more influence globally than China is able to, because China is on the edge. Because we are in the center. You extend one arm, you're in the Gulf, Middle East. To the south, you're in Africa, Southeast Asia, East Asia, everywhere. So, in a sense, India is the heart of Asia. I think it's not just global expectations, it's also domestic. I think people of your generation, who have grown up in a rising India, also have aspirations that we also want to be a strong power. Will we always remain an also ran, constantly talking about this so-called potential? When will we actually realize it? Jawaharlal Nehru, when he made his famous speech at the time of independence, the Tryst with Destiny speech. Why a tryst? What was so secret about it? Let us embrace it openly. Let us seize this destiny. Now that requires that you have a vision. I think that in our strategic perspective, in the strategic neighborhood that I've just outlined is important, both defense and economic. It was rightly mentioned that economics is at the heart of the thing, but when it comes to our strategic neighborhood, we also have to look at the defense aspects. We cannot ignore defense. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, yes, it is basically economic. And I think we need to focus on the big players like the United States, Germany, Japan, Africa for resources. So the state of our economy is crucial, but equally important is our defense preparedness and our ability and willingness to project force. We must have a dream, the Chinese are talking about the China dream. What is the India dream? What is our grand strategic vision? I mean, we must have a vision. Can we go it alone? Are we a swing state? Should we have interest-based coalitions? These are some of the questions that come to mind. Then there is the question of strategic autonomy, which was very dear, and rightly so, to all our leaders. I remember that reading that in 1949, when Mr. Nehru went to the United States for the first time, India was suffering from a food crisis. We needed food. But he said, I'm not going to the United States with a begging bowl. 30-odd years later, Mrs. Indira Gandhi went to the United States and was asked about the so-called tilt in India's foreign policy. And to which she said, we do not tilt, we stand upright. And of course, we know in 1998, Mr. Vajpayee as the Prime Minister made India a nuclear power. It was about asserting our independence. The trouble is that India's DNA in general is a defensive and non-aggressive mindset. Bhai, hame kuch nahi chahiye, hame chhod dijiye. But the world will not leave you alone. Let us be clear on that. You may want it, but the world will not leave you alone. Now the problem is that we are neither strong or aggressive enough to be feared, nor are we small and weak enough to be trusted and manipulated. And therefore, the only option for India is to go out. We have to have an independent role. We have to be one of the poles in the world today. It's a question of survival. And let us also remember one fundamental principle. Power is never given, it is always taken. Nobody is going to, we're going in the middle of elections now, nobody gives you power, you have to take power. When Condoleezza Rice, the then US Secretary of State, came in March 2005 and said we will help to make India a major power. What nonsense. Nobody helps to make you a major power. They do things in their national interest. And we have to be aware that many factors will ensure that India is always an independent player. Be it India's size, our anti-colonial tradition, our sense of pride, our sense of self-worth, our achievements, our culture, our belief in ourselves. We know who we are. I remember a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, I was talking to a diplomat from Mauritius, talking about India-Pakistan relations. I said, well, it's only 40 years. 40 years is not a long time in the life of a country. We've been there for thousands of years. He said, what are you talking about? My country is not even 40 years old. But as an Indian, I can dig deep down and say, okay, so, it is 40 years, it doesn't matter. Or it reminds me of what Swami Vivekananda said in 1893 in Chicago at the Parliament of Religions, when the Americans, who were very brash then as they are now and pretty uneducated, said, but Swamiji, why do you, your country is this and that, and you're not going to achieve very much and so forth. So Swamiji looked at him and says, your country has been around for about 125 years. My country has been there for 5,000 years. When you have survived as long as we have, then maybe you can give me a lecture. So I think that this is our strength. And we have to build on our strength. It is futile to try to piggyback on somebody else. Which is why the effort to craft the strategic partnership with the United States has come to nothing. Because the premises were faulty. And we have to get away from everyone having the impression that we are a weak country. We can be manipulated, we can be thrown, kicked around. We have to get onto the high table and to work out a strategy. The first thing which is needed for that is that we need leadership. Which is why I think that Mr. Modi is commanding so much popularity. I don't know what will actually happen, but there is a certain buzz because he's promising leadership. You need clear-headed, resolute leadership. You need to leverage your strengths and overcome them. You need to build the required institutional structures. And you need to get public support, and there is need for public diplomacy. Mr. Nehru, for all his weaknesses, had one strength. He reached out to people. Every 15 days, he used to write a letter to the chief ministers, which have been published, available for anyone to read, where he would share with the chief ministers what he was doing, what were the problems before the country, and to get their support. I think that was very essential. So he briefed them on foreign policy or national affairs, because a chief minister is looking generally at the problems in his or her state. You don't have time to look at the larger issues. But if every 15 days you get a letter from the Prime Minister, you feel involved. And I think this is the same idea which the BJP is now wanting to take forward in the concept of Team India, which has been articulated in the BJP manifesto. We also must need to change our attitude. No chalta hai. Nahi chalta hai. I mean, this is a big, big weakness we have. Let us recognize it. And three, that as we move ahead, we have to recognize the new stakeholders. As I said, it is not just North and South Bloc. There are new coalition partners. There's the role of states who have the regional interests. There are business interests. There's the media. There's the NRIs. So many different interests are there. They all have to be taken on board. Life is not simple, and that is why you require good leadership. Let me now turn to how much more time do I have? Okay, so it's 10:35, so maybe another half an hour? Huh? Okay. I can keep on talking, but I think we need time for questions also. So what I will do is that I will focus on some relationships and then we can get to the rest. Let me first talk about the United States, because it is arguably the most important relationship we have, simply because of what the United States is. We have trade, we have investments, there is technology. So there are benefits to be gained from a good relationship with the United States. We also share common values, an open society, democracy. We have to respectfully recognize that its comprehensive power is unmatched, even though it may be declining. Be it in the military and space field, you can neutralize Indian capability. Be it in the economic and finance, the banks, the stock market, currency. Be it cyberspace. You've seen the WikiLeaks and this NSA snooping. Be it the influence that the United States exercises over other countries, including our neighbors. For all these reasons, a steady improvement and engagement of relations with the United States is desirable. And we have done well to use the window of opportunity in the last decade or so. It started with Mr. Vajpayee's government and it has continued. However, let us also recognize that there are limits to this strategic partnership, because we do have divergences on key global issues. Recently, there's been on trade, on environment issues, our pharmaceutical industry is under threat, IPR differences. There is the US containment policy using Pakistan and now even countries like Bangladesh, that India should be hemmed in by its neighbors. Because, as I said earlier, a very strong India does not suit America. And that is why we continue to have policy differences on many key regional issues, South Asia, Afghanistan, Iran, the Gulf. The Americans say, oh, but well, at least they imply that you have a common interest in containing China and they want us on board. I think we have rightly stayed away a little bit because we have to live with China. I don't think it's possible for us to enter into an anti-Chinese coalition with the United States so openly. Yes, we will use them, but I don't think it can be the wholehearted kind of support, say, which the Japanese or the Europeans give. Because the Americans do not support us on key issues of our concern vis-a-vis China, like Arunachal Pradesh or Ladakh, or do they support our territorial integrity? Do they support us on Kashmir? No. And I think the unfortunate Devyani Khobragade incident 3 months ago, 4 months ago, brought out how the United States, or certain sections in the United States, look at India. The contempt that we can do it and get away with it. What will you do about it? So, there is an inconsistent US interest in India. There is an interest, there is a growing interest, but it's inconsistent. Mr. Bush thought that India was very important, but he also put his arms around Musharraf and called him my good friend. Mr. Obama thought that, when he came here, thought that it was the most important relationship of the 21st century, and now we've fallen off the radar. So, as we try and develop our relations with the United States, we must always be conscious of its limitations. And we must always be on the lookout for counter-Indian pressure points on the United States. Then there is there's Russia, our old friend, certainly a weaker player, no longer a superpower, but never to be written off, as the recent events in Crimea have shown. I think when the Prime Minister was in Moscow about 6 months ago, he rightly said that it was a very special and privileged partnership, that Russia, earlier the Soviet Union, has been a steadfast friend and partner. It's a deep, rock-solid and time-tested relationship. Close congruence on political issues and so forth. I think that's true. So while it is okay to diversify our options, but we should never forget old friends. How can we forget? And you are in a city which has monuments to Soviet assistance. The HEC was set up with Soviet assistance. The first IIT was set up with Soviet assistance. It was after that that the others started coming. BHEL, ONGC, so many of these institutions were set up by the Bhilai, of course. Who can forget Bhilai? Bhilai and then Bokaro. The rupee trade. We didn't have money, but we got assistance. The political support we got, whether it is on Kashmir or Goa or Bangladesh, the military hardware that we get from them, including nuclear submarines, including an aircraft carrier, weapon systems that other countries will not even let you sniff at. So it is this vital support in key areas that we must reciprocate. And yet, we have to recognize that now it is not the time for ideology or sentimentalism. It is mutual interest. There is now a growing energy interest. Our first investments in the oil sector abroad were in Sakhalin. It's very profitable. We are looking for more investments there. But there are many weaknesses. Our trade levels are very low. Our people-to-people contacts are very low. There's a language problem. So there is no huge lobby which is rooting for India. Let me now turn to our neighborhood. A secure neighborhood is critical because it affects us directly. I think there are more states in India which have borders with foreign countries than do not. And here I am including also the coastal states. Andhra, Kerala, or Tamil Nadu, they have huge connections across the Bay of Bengal or the Arabian Sea, which is why there's a Kerala Gulf connection and there's a Tamil Nadu Southeast Asia connection, which is very, very strong. I think that with our neighbors, we need to strike a bargain. What matters to us is that they should do nothing that undermines our security. In return, we have to give them economic benefits. We have to give our neighbors a stake in our growth and prosperity. We have to be magnanimous and give assistance directed at projects that benefit recipient countries. Insulation is impossible because our borders are porous. How are you going to police, say, the India-Bangladesh border or the India-Nepal border? When a country like the United States has been unable to control illegal migration from Mexico, with all the money, resources, and the fact that it's a riverine border, what hope there is that you will be able to effectively seal off a border, no matter what fence you will have. So the strategy has to be that, well, we are growing, please join us in our growth. Otherwise, the problem will not be solved, in my opinion. We imagine ourselves as the leader of South Asia, and I think that we have to have a leadership role if we are to play a global role, but it must be earned. And we have to find ways to deal with the identity crisis that faces many of our neighbors, the artificial borders that have been created, the contradictions arising from the multiple identities our neighbors have. One, the modern identities as nation states which have to distance themselves, keep themselves away from India, and yet their hearts, their minds, their culture is so similar to ours. So we must engage with them. I think we have not been engaging with them sufficiently. Look at the number of visits the Prime Minister has paid to the West, and how many has he paid to our neighboring countries? And is it so difficult? Does every visit have to have a result? Can't you just go and say, I'm coming for a cup of tea or having a lunch with you, let's have a chat. I will talk to you about bilateral issues. Let me brief you on what I have been doing. You will ensure that they feel part of the thing. They feel involved in what you are doing. Of course, ordinary people have a role to play, and I think many of us are not sensitive enough to their concerns. So we are often boorish or condescending or overbearing. I think ordinary people, our tourists also must do that. We have to use our levers against them, subtly. We already have with, say, Nepal, the open border and the currency. If there is no open border and currency, Nepal will blow up immediately because you are the safety wall which is preventing Nepal from going up. If there are, I don't know how many Nepalis there are in India, 10 million, 15 million, but if they were all to be bottled up, Nepal, it will blow up. It's blowing up anyway. Look at Bangladesh. Bangladeshi told me, he says, you know, it is the cattle which are smuggled from India which ensure that we are not a vegetarian country. That's it. There is this, in my view, stupid debate about making the channel to connect East and West India through the Pak Straits, the canal, Setu Samundaram Canal. Ridiculous. We should be building a bridge to connect Sri Lanka to India. Let's also remember one thing. Our neighbors will never love India, but the trouble is that they don't fear us enough. I think it's enough if they begin to respect us. Our goal should be respect, some admiration for India, and some sensitivity to our red lines. With our neighbors, we cannot follow a one-size-fits-all approach. Take Bhutan and Maldives. They're small, vulnerable, they're friendly. But let's not take them for granted. We have to be generous. Then there are the middle countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar. They're like Indian states. Let's treat them like Indian states. We give incentives for backward states. You know, why can't we do that? Why can't we co-opt their elites? Why can't we have a non-reciprocal approach? Why can't we be truly like a big, generous brother? Choti baat ko chodo. But on the big things, don't mess with me. Smaller things, I'll let you go. Isn't that what we do with our states? Isn't that what a small state like Jharkhand, relatively speaking, expects from the center? But look, you know, I mean, okay, we may have only 14 votes there, but you know, we are important. We may not be UP with 80, but you know, it's still important. You need that respect. Like the Northeasters, Assam, Tripura, Meghalaya, they need to be treated properly. And for the first time now, you have got a major political party going and addressing the concerns of the states. That's important. So similarly, we have to address their concerns. We have to co-opt their elites, bring their businessmen over. And then we have the difficult players, the Pakistan and China, who are hostile, who are actively undermining India and mutually collaborating. I think in general, we need to support more democratic than other non-democratic regimes. And, you know, democracy is very infectious. Because if something is happening in West Bengal or Assam or UP, it has an impact across the border. So that is our strength. And we have to utilize that fully. I will conclude by speaking a little bit about Pakistan and China, but then I think there is no time for anything else. Would that be all right? Well, Pakistan, our most difficult neighbor, because of its military and nuclear capabilities, its alliances with the US, China, and Saudi Arabia, because it is, let us recognize it frankly, as much a domestic as a foreign policy issue. It's politically incorrect to think of it in terms, but Pakistan is just not any other state. It is a state which was created by a section of people who felt that they could not live in peace and harmony with the majority community in India. And that's the reality. Its ideology and identity crisis exists. They have dreams of ruling India. And they have the mentality of the invaders. I was telling one of the faculty members last evening at a dinner about somebody who is high up, who betrays a certain mentality. But you take, for example, say the Pakistani missiles. What are the names of the missiles? Babur, Ghaznavi, Gauri, Abdali. Who are all these characters? They're all those who invaded what is now Pakistan. Yet they are their heroes. I mean, Abdali was no lover of what is now Pakistan. But the mindset is that they fancy themselves that we were the invaders. We were ruling India for 700-800 years. Then the British took away power, they should have given it back to us. So our flag should fly in India. And that is the mindset. It is changing to some extent, but not sufficiently, I think, among the ruling class. And now, we have, unfortunately, every Indian Prime Minister has fancied that he is going to be the peacemaker, he is going to bring home the Nobel Peace Prize. So there is no romanticized sentimentalism. You had Indira Gandhi, who lost the opportunity at Shimla. You had Lal Bahadur Shastri, who gave away Haji Pass. You had Inder Gujral with his Japhi diplomacy. You have Manmohan Singh with his dreams of visiting his home village and doing it. You had Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who thought that he was going to do something there. I mean, everyone has tried but failed. And what this has done is to reinforce the Pakistani image that India is a flabby, ineffective giant. And we can kick it around. You can do the attack on Parliament, nothing happens. You do the 26/11 in Mumbai, nothing happens. Anything you do, nothing happens. Why? But I'm not saying that you do not have a dialogue with Pakistan, that you do not have an opening with Pakistan. Certainly you have. But you must, if with one hand you're having a handshake, with the other hand you have a danda. I mean, you can't have only the handshake, your hand will get weak. Is there a change in the Pakistani mindset? Well, there are some people, I think, now in Pakistan who realize that the real danger to Pakistan comes from within, from Afghanistan side, not from India. But there are uncertainties, and I don't have to go into details. Uncertainties of what is happening in Pakistan and what will happen in Afghanistan now after the Americans. I don't know where they will withdraw their forces. There's an economic crisis there. I think that our benchmark should be how they tackle terrorism and what their attitude is. I mean, when you have a country which is actively trying to undermine you, to weaken you, to split you, how do you have normal relations with that country? We have also run out of leverages because we say, oh, you know, there's a nuclear factor. So we deployed our army in 2002, then we withdrew. We did nothing after 2008. And I have been arguing that we should use some lever, which I've discussed in greater detail in my book. There's no time to discuss it in any detail here, but I'll briefly tell you. Let's use the weapon of water. We should tell them, you know, we want to renegotiate in this water. We're not abrogating it. We just want to renegotiate. Why? Well, for the sake of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Because every party in Jammu and Kashmir feels that they have got a bad deal. Talk to any politician. What have we got? Hamara pani ja raha hai. And we should simultaneously, now what will that do? If they say you are not going to renegotiate the treaty, you can say, well, you have a huge weapon thing. No, I mean, you're concerned for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So you will cut a rift between the people of Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan. I think that's in our interest. The second is, they're the eastern rivers. Ravi, Beas, Satluj. We are entitled to use these waters 100%, but we are not using them 100%. Because there are intrastate differences between Punjab and Haryana and Rajasthan, and we haven't built the Indira Gandhi Canal, and you know, the Punjab says that I would rather let this water go into Pakistan than give it to Haryana, and so on and so forth. But if you were to simply say that I'm going to, just make a statement, I'm going to ensure that India uses the Indus waters as per the treaty and we will utilize them fully. If there is even a 5% drop in the water flow without your violating the treaty, you have set a fire under Pakistan. You have lit a fire under Pakistan. Why don't we do it? It's not that these options have not been thought of, but politically governments have not thought it wise or didn't have the guts to do it, I don't know. Finally, China. It's our biggest challenge because it is a growing power in Asia, in the world. We need to work with China in many respects. We compete with China in other respects. But ultimately, China matters to us because it is a neighbor. And we have seen little reason to trust China, and yet at the same time, we must seek to build in the long term a non-hostile relationship. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have a game plan which says that we must be perpetually hostile. It doesn't make sense. So therefore, I believe that our policy on China has to follow multiple tracks. There's a track A, and there's a track B, and there's a track C. And if they do this, then we will do this, then we have to put pressure on this. And so it's like a chess game. Little moves here and there you have to do. You cannot say, oh, we will be friends with China, or China will only be hostile to us. We have to identify their weaknesses and exploit them. And this is what the Chinese are doing. They are constantly probing and testing. This is what they did in Depsang in Ladakh last year. How do we react in a crisis? I wouldn't be surprised if China and Pakistan in the coming weeks, after a new government is in place, and particularly if it is Mr. Modi, will want to do something that will probe and test the new government. किस मिट्टी का बना हुआ है? We have to be prepared for that. And never convey an impression of weakness. If you convey an impression of weakness, half the battle is lost anyway. There's the border. We have been talking about building infrastructure, but haven't really done enough. We must speed it up. We must give more resources there. We must be more vigilant. We must settle people there. We also need to change our tactics. The Chinese claim that they have they want Tawang because one of the Dalai Lamas was born there. Our claim should be, oh really? You know, but Kailash Mansarovar is the home of Lord Shiva. Millions of Indians believe it is the home of Lord Shiva. वो तो हमारा होना चाहिए. Did they need a visa from the Tibetans and the Chinese to visit Kailash Mansarovar? No. You just went there. That is the home of Lord Shiva. So what kind of nonsense are they talking about? So we need to do that. Then the Chinese sometimes say, you know, we have only a 2,000-kilometer border with India. And they knock off the whole of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh. To which my response would be, the Chinese are absolutely right, because Jammu and Kashmir has a border not with China but with Xinjiang. So, you know, you need to be a little more aggressive in your approach, because if you are willing to settle for something, you have to expand your claims beyond that. Then only will you settle. If you say, no, we are going to settle only at the foothills of the Himalayas, well, you won't get that. You have to be firm on projects which they are doing in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Tell them that this is fair target, this is Indian territory, and if your targets get blown up, don't blame us then. I don't think the border issue will be decided quickly, because I think the public positions have become so far apart, and there is nationalism not only in China but in India. It won't be easy. How will we get public support? And therefore, I believe that the focus, we should try and bring back the focus to say, okay, what is the line of actual control? It was that focus, and then we said, okay, we'll have a political settlement. So in 2005, there was an agreement on the political parameters and guiding principles, but the Chinese have resiled from that. And I think that we need to finesse the border issue. Sometimes there can be no clarity. Sometimes it is best to leave matters as they are, so long as there is peace. And we should perhaps say that let us look at border projects. Let us look at the border not as a line, but as a zone that unites our countries rather than divides them. Let us look at pilgrim corridors to Tawang and to Kailash Mansarovar. Let us look at energy pipelines or communication links. If China can have a project along the Karakoram highway to Gwadar, well, it would be great if we could have something with China where, say, gas comes from Central Asia to India and oil goes from Persian Gulf via India to China. Now that would hardwire in a manner that it is difficult to remove. Of course, we need to build up our defense capabilities. We need to work with China's neighbors, especially Japan and Vietnam and others who have problems with them. On Tibet, that's the big question. We have to prepare for a post-Dalai Lama situation. There are 2 or 3 elements of Tibet. One is human rights. And I think we should say, look, no, it's really your problem. You say these are your citizens, please create the conditions where these people can go back to Tibet. Why are you telling us? They have come here because you have not created the conditions. The second, water. We've been talking to them. The waters are flowing, and this is a problem not just with India, but with all of China's neighbors. Just because China is controlling Tibet today does not mean that they can control the waters. It is like a third pole. And we have to say that this is something which is a global commons. This is a heritage of the world, because there are at least 1 billion people or more who depend on the waters of the rivers that rise in Tibet. Look at the major rivers, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Satluj, the Mekong, the Salween, the Yangtze, Huangbo. All these rivers and civilizations have grown up because of the water. Now today say we're going to stop the waters or reduce the water. It's not going to work. You'll have a conflict. And finally, I think we have to deal with China at a psychological level. I think there's too much of our starry-eyed business. Oh, how great China is. Why don't we look at China's weaknesses, not its strengths? You know, Mao Zedong, when he met with Mr. Panikkar, our first ambassador to China, he asked him, you know, in China there is a belief that if you have led a virtuous life, you will be reborn in India. Right? That is the whole which is there. Buddhism went from India to China. So in that sense, India is the mother country, not China. We have to emphasize our strengths, how we can handle our diversity. We have problems in India. But we think that by engaging with people, by having a democratic system, by civil society, by open system of democracy, rule of law, that we will be able to hopefully bring all sections of the people together, make them stakeholders. People, well, there are some, including in this part, who feel that the system needs to be changed. But I think by and large, people in India feel, yes, we can work within the system and things. That is not the case in China. I think we are much more flexible, we are more innovative. Recently, you might have read in the newspapers how the Chinese are so worried that Indians are heading US corporations. Why aren't the Chinese heading them? Because Indians think differently than the Chinese. So, friends, this is my brief presentation on Indian foreign policy challenges, rethinking policy. I want to speak a lot more, but there's obviously not enough time. And I want to encourage you to ask any questions, make any observations in the time that is available for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. At this moment, I recall my school days when I was studying Indian foreign policy particularly. I was talking I'm quoting Atal Bihari Vajpayee's quotation regarding the Indian foreign policy during the Agra summit, that as a role of India, we can change history but not geography. We can change our friends but not neighbors. In that complexities and in that compulsions, it's India which has to play its role between both the complexities and the compulsions. And it has been seen for last almost half century that we are getting mixed reactions regarding the Indian foreign policy, may it be a Farka Marriage Act, may it be a Shimla Act, or wherever we were dealing with the Foreign Policy Act. And the role of the India, since we are having mixed reactions, we either failed or we are at par failed, but we didn't succeed in such a level. So after getting such a brilliant lecture by Ambassador Rajiv Sikri and the intellectual insights given by him on the role of the India, the requirement, the needful change which we have to think about the Indian foreign policy, that right time after decades, after almost half century, in this particular period of globalization, liberalization and privatization, what is required is that India, which has been following the policy of defensive in context of Indian foreign policy, it is now required that we should at least be proactive. Proactive in the sense that we should not be offensive. Proactive in the sense that we should now, it's a right time to realize the role of India in context of the South Asia and in a greater role of international politics. We require that India should have a proper proactive role. So may it be the problem of the identity crisis of the neighbors, or some kind of stereotypings or biases which America or some big powers as such Germany or Japan or Russia is having. In that scenario, it is India, it is their problem, but we have to realize we have to make our own policies, our own choices in such a way that we should let the world realize that we are a power, we are having our own role and we are having our own standing, and we are going to define the moments in history in future. With these words, I extend my gratitude to Ambassador Rajiv Sikri for such a brilliant insight put on this the role of the Indian foreign policy, particularly in context of international relations. And now the house is open for questions from the brilliant minds. Any questions from the students, from the teachers, or faculty?
Yes, sir. I have one.
Good morning, sirs. Perhaps all will be of same opinion with me that the dynastic ruling in Nepal was better for India. The relationship between Nepal and India was very good. So far, dynastic ruling was there in Nepal. But we saw that Nepal ultimately turned into a republic and democratic country, and there are so many things has happened, and ultimately the relationship with India is not so much intense as was before. Then why India was not successful to keep its dynastic ruling as it was? That is my first question. And second question is that our Honorable Speaker has pointed out that all the Prime Minister of India perhaps prayed for the Nobel Peace Prize with the relationship with Pakistan, a good relationship with Pakistan, etc. etc. Yes, they are the public leaders, they are elected leaders, that is right. But it is also right that our bureaucratic system, our bureaucrats, has got a very good role in foreign policy, in India's internal policy matters, etc. etc. Whatever that system, India's bureaucracy system, what was weak at that time? Why that system would not convince our prime ministers that no, it is not the proper way of thinking. Thank you.
Your observations on Nepal are well taken. I think it's an important point you have made, that monarchy was probably good for India. Nepal's identity rested on its monarchy. And therefore, when the monarchy